Welcome to The Complete Musician, creativity at its core, exploring innovative musical ideas, thoughts, and techniques for the modern musician in today's society, with your hosts, James Nagus and Drew Phillips.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Complete Musician Podcast. This is a continuation episode from the last one that came before this, which is an interview with Dr. Anne Marie Cherry, who is the horn professor at Columbus State University. We're talking about a teaching mini-series I did over the past few The Complete Musician Podcast episodes where James wasn't here. And we're just talking about the topics. We've discussed 3 topics already, and that episode kind of started to get long, and we have a few more to talk about. So I'm picking up the episode right where we left off. So if you haven't listened to the previous episode to know what we're talking about, go and give that a listen. She has so many amazing pedagogical ideas, and we talk about so much that I think you'll be missing out if you don't listen to what we've already gone over. But anyway, thanks for listening, and here's the rest of that episode.
Let's move on to talking about assessment and feedback.
Yeah. So my first thought, you were talking about written assessment.
Yeah.
I use written assessment in the form of program notes and concert reviews sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah. And I'm a big believer in helping students find their authentic voice. Like, no one wants to read program notes that read like a really bad music history essay.
Right.
And so like helping them find their way to talk about music that still feels like them. But you're right. Like, what we do is not the same kind of written assessment as like a theory class or an English class.
Right.
But I think it's important. I wondered what you thought about like feedback, including questions.
Can you be more specific?
Yeah. I guess this probably goes back to, I had just listened to that like Ask the Second Question podcast.
Yeah.
But like the idea of when they risk something and they fail it, right? Like they take a big chance.
Which happens a lot.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like we play the horn, we're like acrobats.
Right.
But to be able to be like, okay, what felt really good about that? Instead of you telling them what was good about it, being like, what was good about that? What felt different? Like,
I do that. Yes. I do that. And actually my the TA that is teaching at Liberty right now, or 2 weeks ago or something, he taught lessons, and he did that with the students. He said, like, tell me something you really liked about that, or like, what did you really like? And I was like, that's a really good thing to do. Yes.
Well, and you talk about that in a different episode, like people assessing the things they do well, and I think that's hugely important. I don't remember what episode that is, but yes, I always, when I meet a new student, I'm like, tell me something you love about how you play the horn. And they look at me with a blank stare, and I'm like, no, it's it's like, no, it's okay to know that you're good at things.
Yeah.
The only other thing I thought about, we're going back to learning styles with this thought, the idea of a variety of feedback. So like the students who are really tied into how it feels to play the horn, or like are kinesthetic learners.
Okay.
Like if you modify the feedback to be like, okay, well, does it feel easier, or do you remember how that feels versus remember how it sounds? I've been exploring with my students a lot this week a term that Fergus McWilliams uses in his book called being horn blind, where like he talks about the amount of nerves that it takes to like in your fingertips and in your lips.
I remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how like effectively your brain is overloaded with those sensations, and it's really hard to hear other things, right? Like, so the idea of trusting your kinesthetic learning, be like, you've been doing this a million times. I will sometimes say to a student, like, you've been playing that note since 6th grade. Stop thinking about it. Like, just think about what it sounds like, or think about how it feels. Don't.
And that is so interesting, because I feel like a lot of my instruction has been, and maybe it's just been me getting used to doing some kind of technical whatever, but I think a lot of my instruction has been, it doesn't matter what it feels like. So it only matters how it sounds. So is that uncomfortable? Too bad. It sounds good. Who cares?
Right.
And so I think that has actually affected me a little bit, not in a negative way, but like, I think I go towards that more, and maybe I need to include more of the kinesthetic thing of like, does this feel, I mean, of course, like high C's are never going to feel good. Like, and then I think I was experiencing this mostly when I was really working on beefing up my low range. Because, pulling the corners down and really flexing the chin down. And I think my teacher, I think she said, like, it's not comfortable.
Right.
Like that is not super comfortable, and you could get really fatigued and tired while you're doing this. And so playing down there and doing the athletic things that low horn players have to do, not comfortable, but it sounds good. So you have to kind of get over it. And so I'm wondering how much of that I need to include in my lessons, because I generally stay away from that. Like, how does it feel? Because I'm like, it sounds good. Who cares?
Well, right. My interest with how does it feel is it a feeling they can duplicate later?
Oh yeah,
like,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So like if they're sitting in rehearsal and all of a sudden their low horn isn't happening, and then they have like a mental inventory of like, well, does it feel the same?
Yeah. And like practice room. Yeah.
Right. Because that to me, so low horn is a great analogy. My face doesn't want to play low. I have to like coax it and bribe it into playing low.
You've met me. So
yeah, I get it. Yeah. So for me, learning to play low was entirely about accepting the fact that it felt totally different from the rest of my setup. It didn't necessarily look different. It just felt different.
Yeah.
And that I had to lean into that and embrace that it was a different feeling. Yeah. So I think that's kind of sometimes when I'm going, but also I think that sometimes I want to ask them how it feels, because when you ask someone how it feels, they're less likely to say that was bad.
Right.
They're more likely going to focus on and so I try to avoid letting my students build a narrative of, well, I'm bad at this.
Right.
Or that was the worst that's ever going to sound it, or like whatever, something like that. I want them to always be like, well, it didn't feel great, or it felt like I was overworking this, or I was, more conscious of this. But I will say, I do spend a lot of time asking students, like, well, how did it sound? Like, it's not that I don't ask them that question. I think that's hugely important. And this actually is a thing that I wrote down, which was like the last thing I wrote down about this episode was making your why clear, like YWHY in quotes. Like I'm having a big discussion with a lot of my students about B flat horn right now. Right. And it's not that I'm not an advocate of using it, but I always tell them I don't want to be able to know if my eyes are closed, which side of the horn you're on.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that. Yep.
Yeah, and so being able to be like, I'm asking you to consider new fingering because you're not achieving the sound that we want, or it's less resonant, or like tying it back into something that isn't just, well, it feels easier. Because I agree with you, there are times that you're choosing a thing that feels less comfortable to achieve the thing that you want.
Yeah.
Which is just, I mean, like being a horn player is being professionally uncomfortable, I think.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I thought that was a great, I mean, you have a very methodical and well-rounded approach to feedback that I think is great. I think that a lot of private lesson teachers especially are guilty of just wanting it to be good enough and being like, yep, that's done, and not giving students feedback that helps them duplicate that. Right. So I loved this. I was like, that's great, because they need that kind of feedback. So thank you for enumerating those many things. That was great.
You're welcome. Okay. All right. Then the next one was sequencing.
Yes. So we have sequencing. Okay, I have to read my handwriting here.
Talked about goal accomplishment.
Yes.
Making sure that everything's organic. That was the big one. Like an organic path that goes back to fundamentals as a natural progression, all that kind of stuff.
No, I thought that was great. So here, maybe you can help me decipher this, because here's what I literally wrote. Improv/troubleshooting can be helpful, demonstrates creative problem solving. So like clearly I was agreeing with something you said. Oh, I get what I'm saying. Okay. I've slept since then, so who knows. That you talked about like using improv and troubleshooting. I think that's great, because when we are our own teachers, like when we're done with school or over the summer or whatever time, there's going to be that moment where our teacher is not there to be like, here's how you need to practice.
Right. Oh, yes.
And what I love about the idea of using improv, or like taking a step out of a thing they're doing and like making a derivative exercise out of it, is that it shows them what it looks like to be creative in your problem solving, instead of being like, well, I do this routine because I always do this routine. To be like, well, clearly this, whether it's solo, excerpt, etude, doesn't matter. This thing I'm working on is illustrating a gap in what I'm doing. And so I'm going to pivot and be creative about approaching it. And so I love that, is I think what that was all about. Yep. And then Oh, like having guideposts, like, again, you are so detail oriented and I laud you for it. I applaud you for it. I'm the sort of person who will like start a bullet journal and be obsessive for 2 days and then like get guilty and not look at it for 2 months.
Yeah.
So if I'm hyper detailed, I don't do well, and I just have to know. So like I always have guideposts. So like this is really easy if you're lucky enough to have a studio class, right? So like if I know that my students have a mock audition at the end of the month, then I know that like 3 weeks before that, I want them to feel like they have covered all of their excerpts with me in a lesson. Right. And the last 3 weeks are just polishing, right? Or jury or whatever. So having guideposts along the way of like, at this point, we should have covered all of the excerpts. Yes. Right. But even if each lesson looks really different, because maybe we have to go way out in the weeds for one of these etudes or excerpts to talk about something, and maybe another one goes by really, really fast. Yeah. Or maybe it's the same issue. So I tend to function in this kind of like floatier guidepost system.
Well, yours is it's long spanning. You're about the long goal.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Because if I can get really negatively obsessive about short-term goals.
Oh, okay.
In a way that can feel not empowering to students. Because I will tend to be a perfectionist and be like, well, it's not there yet. So if I can't find a way to disengage and be like, that's a work in progress. The work you need to do, bring it back in a couple weeks when you feel like it's ready, but let's next week focus on the ones we didn't talk about today. Right. But that's again about knowing yourself. Like I never want to beat my students down with my perfectionism to the point that they feel like it's never going to be good enough for me.
Right.
Because that's different than me saying like, yeah, there's always going to be something to work on. Like I always tell my students like excerpts live with us forever. I'm never going to be done with Unheld and Laban.
Never.
Right.
Never.
It's just
or
going to
the
live
long
with
call,
me.
or Dust Ryan Gold, whatever. It never
Any
will be
of
done.
them. Right. Because you get to a point and then all of a sudden you realize a thing that you were doing that you didn't know you were doing. And it's just continually unlocking. I mean, I'm not a video game player, but I feel like video games work that way, where like you beat a level and then there's an Easter egg that you didn't know was there. And it like unlocks things. Am I wrong? I don't know.
You're talking to the video game masters here. I thought you were James because he is.
Right, because I talked about video games.
So what you said was exactly right. So you must know video games.
Fake it till you make it, my friends. All of my students are obsessed with video games, so I'm trying to learn the lingo. I'm trying to learn their vocab.
Well, we'll tell you what to don't worry about it. We got you.
Perfect. Anyways, but so I think sequencing is really important, and that as a teacher, you need to understand yourself and how you are accountable the best, whether it's like short-term goals, long-term goals, big picture, small picture, that all of those are valid, but that you have to know how effective you can be yourself, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely makes sense. Cool.
Great. Okay. Expectations, is that what we're on? Is it the last one?
Yeah, there's the bonus episode talking about expectations.
Oh, man. Yes. Okay, so this I love because I feel like this is the big piece. This is the magic piece in building trust with your students.
Yes.
And so I think, we could have spent a whole other hour on this topic, but.
Great. And we are at the hour mark. It's great.
Oh, no. I'm sorry, everyone. I babble. Okay. So some people have like an elaborate teaching philosophy, and I don't, because again, general frameworks is where my brain works.
Yeah.
But one thing I was thinking about this with the expectations is how many times I phrase things as like paired expectations. So like it's my expectation of them that they will bring considered musical opinions to their lesson, which implies that they've like listened and done work and whatever, but that they have the right to expect of me, therefore that I will be open and patient to their opinions.
Yeah.
And that it's like dualities that exist together, right? Like that for every expectation I have of them, they have the right to have an expectation in reverse of me or in complement to me.
And this reminds me of I can't remember, is it Doug Hill's Creative Wanderings? Is that the book that talks about the respondable teacher and student?
Yes.
Is that the book?
It's
is it not Creative Wanderings? It's Thoughts and Collected Teachings.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yes, that's the one. And yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly what a lot of this is rooted in, is this idea of being the respondable teacher and responsible student. Because my expectation is always that they're going to try and do the work. Not that they're there yet, but that I see that they've done the work. Right. And
it's so hard with students who come to you for different reasons. I mean, that's so difficult.
Yes. Absolutely. One of the expectations I've been mulling over that they are allowed to have of me, or I have a list of the ones that I feel like are fair. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yes.
That what my students can expect of me is that I will be open, patient, and compassionate. That I will create room for us to have inquiry together. That this is not just I have all the answers, but like that they're going to come in and maybe they have, like if a student wants to win a job in a European orchestra or something and they have a real passion for, or if they have a real passion for composing all their own music, like maybe they're not interested in whatever else, that I will create room for that while still having long-term goals, but that I recognize who they are as an individual. Right. And I was very lucky to have a teacher like that. Pat Hughes is the epitome of that to me.
Right.
And that's a lot of where this comes from. Like he was incredibly patient with me and let me just kind of find my way while always holding me to a high standard of whatever my goals were at that moment.
I also had the same kind of training and the same kind of teachers who just let me come in and say, this is what I want to work on because this is what I want to do. Yeah.
Yep. And I think that's hugely powerful. Yeah. But the last one I've really been thinking about is that it should be their expectation of me that I will demonstrate excellence and integrity in all of my interactions with them. And that requires different things of me. Like, if I pick up the horn to model something, but I don't approach it with integrity or excellence, like if I phone it in, they'll know.
Or if I pick up my horn and like, I'm going to model this and bomb.
Yes.
Which like happens.
Right. Yeah. But like then admitting it, like the difference between pretending like that, well, that's how that goes.
Yeah.
Or being like, well, okay, that wasn't ideal, right? Yeah. Or what it means to be. It's like I just gave a recital literally this afternoon.
Yes.
And one of my students came up to me afterwards, and they're like, "How do you feel?" And I was like, "A mix of awesome and horrible," because that was the honest answer. Like I felt like I had to have integrity in that moment and not pretend like the things that we all know didn't go well in that moment. I can't pretend like they didn't happen.
And I think, like you said, that's important that we are like that. I don't ever want to be known as that person who's like, everything I do is the best ever, and that you shall answer to me, and that everything that falls out of the horn is beautiful. It's not. Or, and same thing with them. Like, everything you do is not always awesome, and correct. I am obligated as a teacher to tell you when that was not awesome.
Right.
And my students know, I try to be this way. I try to be critical, but you're right, in an empowering, encouraging way. So after a concert, go up and, say there were some really nice moments.
Yes.
And this is a specific moment that was really musical. This you did, it was a really good, I don't know if I've ever told a student what I'm thinking, like, that was a good attempt. Because that sounds really negative.
It does, but I said
to a good way to say that.
Yeah, I said to a student recently, like, I love the passion that you brought to every note. You really went for it, and it
did your best.
People. You went for it, and that was powerful. I mean, you missed some notes, but the intent was there.
Yes.
And I'm a big believer the audience will forgive chipped notes if they know where it was going.
They don't care at all. Like,
no, they don't care. Only conductors care.
It's true.
Yeah.
And we care. We care.
Well,
that's it.
Yeah, I always tell students, like, all of your cracked notes are like etched on your heart for all eternity. Yeah. You remember them all and like mull them over, but that's not very healthy. So the last thing I wrote down was I wrote yes and underlined it 4 times. So I very clearly agree with something that you said. So what I wrote down was yes to students identifying their own strengths.
Yes.
And then I wrote also owning their progress. So if a student can identify their strengths, that means that they can own it, and they can also own what needs to get there. And I think that's hugely important because it's really easy, I think, for students to feel disengaged from their own successes. Like, well, my teacher said this thing and that is what made the difference. No, it's not. Like, we say things to students all the time, but if they're not willing to own it and do the work, then it's not going to happen.
Right.
And we know that because all of us, like, there was that thing we wouldn't practice for forever. Like, I always joke with people about how lip trills were my dark secret for years. Like, I couldn't do them.
Me too. Oh,
right. Until a teacher, like, basically like, this is ridiculous. You have to learn.
You saved my life on lip trills. He taught me at a lip trill. It was him.
Really?
That's amazing. It was him. It was
That's awesome. I love it.
Little triplet exercise. Love it.
Yeah.
The one taught me at a lip trill. Anyway, yes, I understand completely.
But yeah, so like giving them, and I guess it probably comes back to empowerment, but it's all this kind of like loosely, nebulously connected idea of like ownership and empowerment and goal setting, but that it's their journey. And that you're helping them realize the things that need their attention. Like, we just need to shift your attention here for a little bit because these other things are awesome. And we're going to celebrate that they're awesome, but we're not just going to stay in the awesome place. We're going to expand awesome outward to these things that are not going so well.
It makes it so much less negative and such a focus on the positive, which is so important.
Which I think, I mean, horn players can go to dark places really quickly because our instrument is mean.
So mean.
Yeah, but so I don't know, but I love that what you're saying about like making a student sit down and identify a thing you're good at. I think that's hugely important.
Yeah.
So Drew, the moral of the story is I loved all the things that you said, and I love talking about this stuff with other teachers. So thank you for letting me babble at you.
Oh, it was our pleasure, my pleasure, because James isn't here. I mean, you are, James. It was.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm eating a taco. I'm not.
It was great, fantastic. It was fantastic to talk about these things, and there should be many more talks between all teachers.
Yes.
So many more talks because it is important for all of us to learn from each other, and we all do things differently, and it's all about, in the very Sandra Bullock way of more musical world peace. Is what we want, is just all of that, but without the sarcasm and a gun. That's just we don't need that. Anyway, well, thank you so much for being on here and talking about all of this, because it was wonderful to hear all of your points and your point of view, and to make me question things, because now my teaching will improve from just thinking about these things.
Well,
it's
and
awesome.
Like I said, I spent the entire week thinking about the things I heard on the podcast and being like, okay, how am I doing on these things? So this is great. Everyone go ask each other questions. That's the correct answer.
More inquisitive. Awesome. Well, yes, thank you so much for being here. This has been another episode of the Complete Musician Podcast. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at our email at kormotohorn@gmail.com. Please subscribe to us on iTunes and leave us a review if you loved or hated this. Either one. But because Anne-Marie is here, you will love it, obviously.
Or you will hate it very strongly.
Not at all. Not at all. We have a Facebook page that we sometimes update, but you should go like it anyway. All of these are on YouTube, and again, we can be found on iTunes, or I guess wherever your podcast can be found. And I think that's gonna wrap us up now. But thank you again for being here, and we will have more plans going on in the works with Kormoto and you, Dr.
And
Chair,
friendship and visits.
Yes, we are very excited about that. So
me too.
Yes. So if you want to reach out, please do that. We'd love to hear from you, and we will be back soon with more content. Thank you for listening.